Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Mike Rain, the editor-in-chief here at NWC, publisher of Professional Sound, Canadian Musician, and other magazines. So thanks for joining us for today's free webinar. Today we'll be talking about my friend and colleague Andrew, along with two incredible guests. They'll be talking about how to be ready to enter the studio, how to be record ready. So like I mentioned, my friend and colleague Andrew Leyenhorst will be your host today, who, in addition to being a writer and editor with Canadian Musician and Professional Sound magazines, Andrew's also a Niagara-based musician and recording engineer himself. Joining him, two outstanding guests who we're privileged to have with us. First up, Dave Bottrill. I'm sure so many people know Dave already. He's a three-time Grammy Award-winning producer and engineer whose decorated career has seen him work with produce and mix records for just an incredible array of high-profile artists, including Tool, Rush, King Crimson, Muse, Smashing Pumpkins, Peter Gabriel, Crownlands, who he's currently working with now. And with Dave and Andrew, of course, also is Neil Sanderson. Neil is a multi-instrumentalist and producer, best known as the drummer, backing vocalist, and co-founder of 15-time Billboard-topping rock band 3 Days Grace. Neil is also the co-founder of Judge and Jury, a label and production team created with Grammy-winning producer Howard Benson. So guys, Andrew, I'm going to hand it over to you in a second. Dave and Neil, thanks so much for joining us today, and I'm looking forward to this one. I'll just note quickly for folks watching, sorry guys, just got to tack on there. This and all our other free webinars are archived for later viewing at nwcwebinars.com. And as you're watching this, if you've got questions, there will be a short Q&A at the end. Put your questions in the chat, and I'll be keeping an eye on those to pass along to Andrew at the end. To make it easy for me to spot, just start your thing with question, colon, or whatever, just so I know, just so it's easier for me to spot. And yeah, like I said, I'll pass those on at the end. All right. Thanks for that, guys. Thanks for your patience. Over to you, Andrew.
Mike, thanks so much for the introduction. Neil, David, thank you so much for joining us today. This is awesome. So we'll get started with a question that's a little bit that tackles the opposite issue. So David, I'll start with you. Tell me about a time when you've encountered an artist that was absolutely not prepared to be in the studio.
Well, I tend to work with musicians that are generally more prepared, but I'd like to tell you a story about a situation where I needed to be prepared as an engineer and producer.
Okay.
As much as a band would need to be. Obviously, when you're a band, your main responsibility is to be well rehearsed and to be prepared to be in the studio, in that your compositions are to the point where I think about 80% of what you're doing. What happened in the situation where the band that I was working with were unprepared was I was doing a session in northern New York State with King Crimson guitarist Robert Fripp and David Sylvian. We were doing a record with as a collaboration between them. They had a four-piece that they were going to be writing and working with. The stick and bass player was named Trey Gunn, and the drummer was a drummer called Jerry Marotta, Jerry who used to work with Peter Gabriel. They started rehearsing in threes. So David and Robert and Trey had rehearsed together, and Robert and Trey and Jerry had rehearsed together, but David Sylvian had never actually rehearsed with Jerry. So we got into the studio and they were sort of improvising and working on material. Jerry is the kind of person who takes up a lot of space in a room. He both sort of physically, as he's a big guy, and creatively and emotionally. And David was the kind of person who would stew about things and not let you know that things were bothering him until they were too late. So we got 4 songs in to the project, and it was sort of an improvisational thing already, but David and Jerry were unable to get along. So Jerry ended up leaving the session. We only had half a record done. But what I had done during part of that time was to record sort of different little things that Jerry had done in loops. And I had a lot of material that I'd built up over the years of source material, loops and sort of atmospheres and things like that. And it ended up that we got back after Jerry had left the session and started writing new material, and I ended up becoming a big part of the rhythm section because I had my computer with loops and textures and sort of Trey put bass lines and pick lines to that. So because I had been prepared with all of these extra source material sounds and rhythm loops and had recorded Jerry doing things and looped up what he was doing, we were able to salvage the session and complete the record. But half the record is not Jerry drumming, it's me being the rhythm section with Trey, and I had been prepared enough to be able to take over, not even thinking that was part of my job description at the beginning, but because I was prepared, I was able to do that.
Cool. Yeah, I guess the dynamics between the musicians kind of is an important thing to be able to deal with as the producer. Neil, what have you got?
Well, I have a couple points I'd like to touch on. One was a young artist I was working with, and my producing partner. We have quite a few producer terms and studio terminology, which is kind of from the outside is like, what are they talking about? But we use this phrase, the tyranny of no. And that becomes, I think, one of the greatest challenges in not only like producing, but also just collaborating with other artists, right? There needs to be a lot of trust involved because we're talking about emotions and pouring out your heart and your soul and your brain into something creative. And I'm kind of along the same way with David. Is we try to align ourselves with artists who are driven, prepared, and hungry and open to new ideas. Right. I think that's the beauty of collaboration and bringing in outside producers and outside ears is to gain that perspective, something that you might not have seen otherwise, and to make the best version that it can be. And I always believe in strength and numbers when it comes to that. This particular young artist, we got into the studio. She a ton of potential. She was very young. Her supportive parents, and it was probably the greatest example of dealing with the tyranny of no, where it was about, we kind of got into this sort of, what about this idea? Well, I wouldn't sing that. What about this idea? Can we try that? And that's not me. I wouldn't listen to that. And it became that sort of where I was, I was sort of having auditioning, like, what about this? What about that? Can we try this? Can we try that? And, I had to sort of just remind the artist that, especially in the digital age of music production, it's not like we're slapping paint on a wall that can't come off. I really I think of making music and producing music as, let's build the castle up, let it stand, take a look at it from a distance, maybe look at it the next day, and decide if we like the dimensions and the shape and what the castle is becoming. And I think not allowing yourself to really sort of just challenge yourself, maybe put yourself out of your comfort zone to do something where you wouldn't normally be, you wouldn't say that normally, or you wouldn't listen to that, or you wouldn't sing this and stuff like that. I think that it's important from the artist's perspective to just let go and open up, to be, or else I think that it's hard as a producer to really bring out the best of the song and the artist if there's that closed door tyranny of no approach.
Cool.
So that's certainly one. The other one was operator error, my own fault, where I don't know. I'm sure I'm not the only producer or musician to learn the hard way when it comes to backing up files. But I do all of the programming for my band 3 Days Grace. And, all of the keyboards and programming, things like that. And so I prepare that before we go into the studio, and it kind of creates somewhat of the framework for what we're building off of. And I had a computer failure, and at the very 11th hour, I had to stay up for like a couple days straight redoing all of the programming programming for an entire album. It took me days and days, but I think the silver lining of the cloud is that I think the second time I went through, the programming turned out to be better.
There you go. So make sure you're backing up your hard drives with your demos and stuff.
No, Neil, I'm with you, Neil, on exactly the same thing about your tyranny of no. I've never used that phrase. I love it though. I have a speech that I say to bands and musicians when I'm entering into a production. I say, look, the only thing I ask of people in the rehearsal and writing stage is that everybody's ideas get a try. Mm-hmm. And I also say to them that not only do they get a try, but if we're going to do this, you have to play it with conviction, because you know what it's like when somebody has an idea, you don't think it's going to work. You think, well, all right, I'll just play it, or I'll do, you know, but it won't work because it's not played with any kind of conviction.
Yeah.
If you play it with conviction and it doesn't work, the room will know that.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The room will understand that, okay, that idea didn't work. But if you can spend, and I'm sure you've done this now, you can spend 20 minutes arguing with an artist or the rest of your band, or saying, well, I think this could work. Well, no, I don't think this could work. And this is why I think it won't work. And then, you know, it's just like
why don't we just try it?
30 seconds later, you'll know whether it works.
Yeah. And one of the the biggest factor in that, and I completely agree, is whether or not the band or the group of people or everyone involved in creating whatever you're about to create has checked their ego at the door. Because the most important thing in that room is that song. It's more important than anyone's personal feelings about how, if their idea got rejected, you know, and that's hard to do sometimes, because again, this is not, you're writing down things that are coming out of your heart, and it's hard sometimes to hear that your idea that you might be precious to because it came from you, gets shot down. And I think the most healthy studio situation is when everyone realizes that that's going to happen. It's for the betterment of the overall goal. And, you know, just because I say that I don't care for that particular idea doesn't mean that I don't like you.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's always a hurdle. I'm fortunate with my band that we trust each other enough that we've got to that point where we can critique each other, and we trust each other that we're critiquing for the right reasons, you know. But
sometimes an idea that doesn't work for that particular song can work for another song, right? Or you can internally recycle that into another idea, or it can be modified to become a better idea. But I'm with you. You have to learn to not be precious about your things and say, okay, well, that didn't work. Let's try something else. Mm-hmm.
So let's actually go down that vein and kind of talk about mindset of an artist kind of coming into the studio and how that's important. And again, because there's the idea of, again, sort of don't be too precious about things. But I guess the idea of, you know, especially for somebody who hasn't recorded in a studio before, coming into that space, there's the idea just of like understanding that going into a studio isn't just necessarily about recording your song and getting out. In some cases it is, but it is very much about transformation and evolution.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it's very difficult to, if your goal, and I kind of have that same a speech of my own when I'm talking to an artist, you know, it's kind of, you know, the reality is like, you know, whatever your goal is, if you want to be an indie artist and create things that for your own personal reasons, you know, I like to swing for the fence when I'm making music. And I like the notion of trying to create something that's going to engage and compel the masses to hear the song and hear their own lives in that song. Go, I know what that guy's saying or that lady's saying. I can relate my life back to those lyrics, and I think that that's such a powerful thing in music. But I also realize that that's not everybody's goal. So I try to establish sort of what the goal is, you know, and you know, the sort of the joke is like, do you want to be driving the van or do you want to be sleeping on the bus? Because to be successful enough to be able to, you know, have a bus or buses and trucks and huge, you know, arenas sold out and things like that, you need to create music that engages and compels the masses, which is the goal, and it's not easy to do.
Right.
Yeah, I think as well, building upon that, when you're working on something, if you're hiring as an artist somebody like Neil or somebody like myself, there has to be, and this comes from us too, there has to be a mutual respect for people where you're saying, okay, we're working with these people because we respect what they do already. We're working with these people because we like what they create, and we believe that their ideas gel with ours and are generally good ideas. And so even though you might hear something in those that you might not expect or you might not like, respecting that those ideas might work, or that they're coming at it from a position of both respect for the creation that you've done and the experience that people like Neil and I have in making making most kinds of music, that you have to understand that you've got to respect all the ideas that are coming in the room, and not think that any of those, as Neil said, are a personal attack of any kind. We're just trying to serve the song. We're trying to make the song as best as it can be.
Cool. And I guess this first 15 minutes has really kind of stood to mention, or to kind of embody one of the points that I wanted to sort of make, is that if you're an artist just starting out, you want to work with a producer rather than just necessarily kind of doing a sort of booking a 2-hour session that is the whole nature of it being you come in, you record, you get out. Because then, as you've kind of seen, working with a producer means you've got somebody who is creatively kind of trying to steer the ship, not necessarily, but work with you to create art rather than a recording necessarily.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my biggest things when I'm sitting, especially, mainly vocals, is, I sit there and I close my eyes when the vocalist is in the booth, and I think to myself, is he or she selling whatever they're trying to say, and am I believing it, or does it sound like the singer is reading off of a piece of paper? And I think, and I'm really sensitive to that, but I think people are very sensitive to that, especially in modern day when there's so much contrived stuff out there, whether it be television and show business in general. People are very, very in tune with what is genuine and what's contrived. I do believe that. So I think the honesty and the vocal delivery of it, sounding like the person is living and dying on that microphone and leaving everything on that microphone, and basically, pouring real, genuine emotion. I try to always keep my finger on that pulse to make sure that we're not just, again, writing something, throwing it into a microphone, calling it a 2-hour session and walking out the door. I don't think, I as a producer, I don't think that I'd be doing my due diligence if I didn't try to make sure that it's honest and legit sounding too.
Yeah, I think you're right, Neil. People know when you're mailing it in, for sure. I think one of the great things, as you were talking about, Andrew, about hiring people to work with, one of the nice things that I think you need to, that artists, younger artists need to understand, is that what you're hiring is somebody, you're hiring them maybe for some skills, but you're hiring them for their taste, and you're hiring them for their independent ear, in that, like, the person that you're hiring doesn't have any agenda on the music other than to make it as good as it can be. They're not, they're less, when they first hear your music, at least in my case, when I first hear the music, it's like, I'm just going to judge it by what I think the quality of the writing is and the quality of the performance is. And I don't think of it in ways of what, only what I would like. I think of it as Neil does too, as like, what's going to appeal to the most amount of people? What's going to be the song on a record, for example, that opens the door? I call them door openers, that open doors to let your fan base in, to then go with all. Like, I don't do an album if I'm working on an album and think, well, let's just create a group of singles. I want them to all be appealing to people, but I want the band to be able to express themselves. But I also want to make sure that they're inviting enough people into their room to listen to what they're doing. So there has to be some material in there. And I'm doing it as a purely objective thing and saying, look, I'm trying to help you guys with your career. Let's write some of these songs and make sure that they open the doors for people to come in. Then you can hit them with your 8-minute opus at that point. But let's get them in the door first.
Yeah. Cool. So yeah, this is why it's important to work with a producer, because again, you're getting somebody that's going to sort of curate your ideas and evolve them, and it's, let's talk about some of the more kind of technical things in terms of, like, Neil, I'll start with you as a drummer, because gear is a big thing, obviously, because let's talk about, you don't want to show up to the studio as a drummer, with destroyed heads, things like that. You want to make sure your gear is prepared. Yes.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's so important. As much as a lot of the stuff happens inside the box now in terms of computers with a lot of the recording and the programming and even some records are done with just strictly programmed drums now. I have a thing where I love the sound of real drums, and I love sitting down. I love the notion that it came from a human sitting down at the drums. Mm-hmm. But certainly, I think definitely being prepared on that front. Actually, my band is going down to Los Angeles to do some recording in a few weeks, and we already have the drum tech advanced. We have the gear is all advanced. We know exactly what gear we want to play on to give us the 3 Days Grace sound that we want. There's so much prep work, but I will say though, of the most prep work that happens for my drumming takes happens right here. This is I pre-program the beats that I'm going to kind of I rough in the beats, and I also on the production side of it with my production partner, I basically build skeletons of what the song's going to be. So I guess you might call it a demo, but I call it sort of the skeleton, where I'll program the drums, I'll program some bass, play some quick, placeholder guitar, and kind of just get a working model of what the song's going to be. And it kind of becomes a template that we do put into the master. We put those tracks into the master session, mm-hmm. so that they're always there. Not that anyone needs to particularly copy, but it gives us a skeleton of what the song is. And it's a helpful building block. So that's really, I'm working quite hard on getting all those skeletons ready to record these songs. The preparation is absolutely key, because kind of sitting in the studio not knowing what the agenda is not really a good feeling. And absolutely. And also, again, kind of to bring it back around, have there been cases, David, all directed towards this one this one towards you, where have you, because a lot of people are particular about their own gear and they want to use their own stuff. Have you ever had it happen where, at your level maybe not, but where somebody's come in with a piece of gear that they want to use, or like a bass or a guitar or something, but the strings are like, super old, or like it's an instrument's clearly not up to snuff.
And they were all the time. This happens all the time. The thing about the worst thing that can happen for me in a situation like that is that a great idea gets stymied because of a piece of gear not working. If you have an idea and you're trying to figure it out, and your guitar, the electronics in it are not working, or your strings are old and dead and they don't sound very good for the part that you're trying to play, it's the worst. When you're coming into the studio, the very least amount of preparation you should do is make sure that your equipment is working properly. You make sure that your amplifiers, if you've got a tube amp, your tubes aren't burnt out. You haven't lost a tube in one of them. You get a new set of strings. You get make sure that the pots in your guitar are not crackly. You've got good cabling that you're plugging in and it works. If you've got a pedal board, making sure that your power supplies are all right and that everything's plugged in properly and all your pedals are working properly. Because if you've written something that's dependent upon all that stuff, and anything in that chain breaks down, you're going to have a hard time, and you're going to just waste studio time in trying to fix problems that, if you were prepared in the first place, wouldn't be a problem. Mm-hmm. So it happens all the time. Now, sometimes you can find a situation where a broken piece of equipment actually creates a new sound that leads to a new part. So it can work both ways, but you should hedge your bets in just making sure that your equipment is working as you want it to be working when you come into the studio. That includes, in the case of drums, making sure that all the lugs are not rattling, that your pedal is oiled, that you've got, all the sounds that you want to create are there, and none of the sounds that you don't want aren't there when you're trying to record.
Yeah, and again, this applies across the board. You know, if you're playing sax, make sure that your keypads are all working. You got reeds, things like that. It's an essential big part of it is that just as much as you yourself as the artist need to be prepared, your gear needs to be ready too. Because, you know, in a lot of studios, you know, there probably will be some degree of stuff there as a fallback. But even then, there's a good chance that it hasn't been looked at in a while either.
I find that you know, the artists that have spent time on the road touring, they tend to be quite on top of maintaining that their gear is working, because there's nothing worse. The only thing worse than something breaking down in the studio is something breaking down on stage.
Oh yes.
And so yeah, it's definitely a gear maintenance is important in everything in music.
And from compositional preparation too, Neil, as you said, if you've got the skeletons of your song written and they're in the sessions already that you can reference, even like you said, you don't necessarily want to use them, but they're there for reference. So if everything's prepared that way, you come into the studio, sorry, you can bang up that session, listen to it. And yeah, okay, this is what we're going to start for. Yep. You know what your tempos are going to be. You know what your, you know, the general approach to the song. Now, if you have a situation where you're working with a producer and you like the producer might want to do something different or change the vibe of a song or the tempo or something like that, I think that sort of thing, you should try to get the producer in with you in your rehearsal space first so that you can go through. I always like to do this with bands. I go through a pre-production period where I'm actually in their rehearsal space and they play the songs through and we listen to them and we try and modify if I think they need modifications or change in spirit or additional parts or something like that. I like to try to get that done before we actually get into the studio. That way, you know, you're not spending a whole bunch of money trying to work something out because somebody else has a vastly different idea. You work out those things beforehand in the rehearsal space, or however somebody writes. If it's on the computer, you go over there and you work on the vibe of the song in the computer before you then go into the studio to record it with a band. However it's done, you do that in the inexpensive time before you get to the expensive time of actually being in the studio.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, make sure. Prepare as much as you can as far as the actual recordings before you actually have to start paying for it.
Absolutely, and especially you know, during especially during the pandemic, you know, we were lucky that, well, first of all, we had planned on taking 20 off of touring before the pandemic happened, and our guitar player had moved to the US. So we had a jump start on trying to learn some of the newer technologies so that we could actually collaborate remotely. So we had, you know, we had been able to kind of streamline how to be able to collaborate online remotely using a combination of Zoom, and there are some other actually new technologies where you can have, you know, whatever your digital audio workstation is that you're working in, whether that be Pro Tools or Logic, etc. There's a technology now that you can actually stream the output of whatever you're working on in full quality to whoever you want. So, for example, when we're working, there'll be the band members on Zoom. I'll be working on the master demo session or the skeleton that we're making to prepare for the template for the studio when we get there. And we have our producer on Zoom who's getting the stream of what I'm working on real time. And so we're working, we're talking, we're kind of throwing around ideas, and he has it up in his studio in his studio monitors. So that technology was a game changer for remote collab, and I think that's going to continue to be very prominent because, you know, we haven't seen our producer in 2 years. But we are rounding out what we think is a really strong record, and it was all done using that method, which is exciting about the future for collaborative, I think. Not having said that, I do think that there's also that, you know, I think having the element of everybody being in the same room and that camaraderie and that, you know, the oneness of everyone being in person, I don't think should be alienated altogether. But there's many different ways to kind of get it done and get prepared.
Yeah, cool. I guess a part of that is I kind of to go back to David's initial anecdote is, you know, you definitely as well when you're going into the studio, whether as a solo artist or as a band, you know, with other collaborators, you definitely want to make sure that you're actually all just kind of vibing with each other in those moments, because otherwise could get weird and derail the whole thing.
Yeah. At the end of the day, it's it's music. It's supposed to be fun and exciting. And I think we kind of have a thing with the band as soon as, even if it's like if the day stops being kind of where it feels like it's not, we kind of just hang it up and pick it up tomorrow because it's supposed to be fun. If it's not fun, I think the music suffers when we're taking it a little bit too seriously, the process.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
I agree, but I would say this. Some music does benefit from being a little on the edge and having like a little bit of conflict where people are like, I find sometimes the gray areas of being on the edge, either of not quite knowing how to song, the moment of discovery of figuring out how to play a song, but also the like, oh, I'm not sure this is working. I'm a bit angry about it, but then you're playing it hard and you get something from that. And that only happens, unfortunately, when you're in the same room and you're working together and things are bouncing off each other. And you know what it's like, when you're playing something, somebody does something, it makes you react in a certain way. And so some of those things that those happy accidents that you can't really plan for can sometimes become the favorite parts of the songs, the favorite parts of the composition. So there is something about kind of being on edge. And I think you have a luxury in that you guys are so tight as a band that even your fuck ups probably sound really good, right? And so like you have those things that kind of screw up, but then you kind of save them at the last second. And it's like, wow, that really, that whole roller coaster ride we went on, that was really cool. There's something to be said for that. And again, it's humans sitting at instruments, and that thing that you're talking about, it's like people sitting at instruments and doing it together. It's kind of irreplaceable, and you can come up with great music in many, many ways. But if you are a band and you are a group of musicians that are playing together, there's nothing that replicates that other than doing that.
Absolutely. And if you do have those happy accidents, you hope that someone hit record.
Oh yeah. Well, always be recording, right?
Yeah. Cool. I'll start taking. I'll take a couple questions right now, David, because I know you're a little strapped for time. But
I'm a little bit. I'm in the middle of an Atmos mix, so I'm having a lot of fun here.
Cool. So let's see. This one's from Keegan. Any tips for vocalists who get in their heads and basically forget how to sing as soon as they walk into the studio?
I think I've been using this little tactic lately, and I don't know if it would help someone that completely forgot how to sing, but sometimes I ask the vocalist to smile when they're singing. I know that sounds a little odd, but it sometimes brings out something on the microphone that I can't quite explain. And maybe it's just the physical that they're opening up their mouth, or maybe it's psychological or something, but I've had some good luck just asking the singer to smile, and it turns the corner. Maybe that's one tip that can be tried if you're in that situation. Get them out of their head a little bit. That's not bad.
Sometimes, depending on the singer and how much they trust me, I'll set up a situation where they're in the studio, maybe build them a little booth, give them a space of their own to hang pictures or something like that. But if it's still not working, sometimes I'll say, well, look, why don't you just come on in the control room, stand beside me, and we can either do it on headphones, or if you want to sing, with some of the speakers on, just to try something out and give you some ideas here. And sometimes those vocals, they become, because they're just natural and sort of the pressure's off, you're not saying, well, we need to get the final vocal in, you got to really deliver here. They come in and it's like, okay, well, just sing me the song here. And then they start singing. And once they get comfortable in that environment, if you're recording, you try, oh yeah, let's hear that back. Oh, I could do that one a little bit better. And then they kind of just get more comfortable, trying to create a situation where the artist feels like they're comfortable and they're going to do their best performance. It's part of the producer's job, I think. And whether it's setting them off into their own room to get in their own head and do something, or pulling them into the control room, or sort of doing half and half, I think you have to find ways with different singers to try to help inspire them and make them feel comfortable, not so comfortable that they get lazy, but and when that happens, you'll see that it's like, okay, now you're comfortable, now deliver, buddy. Then you can
yeah.
Yes.
And
yeah. Go ahead. No, hit.
Oh, to that point, I absolutely agree. And to that point, I think too, having an artist, you get what you need out of, I think we've got this take. You did it. We've got numerous of these takes. Now let's just do one more. Totally unbridled. We already have what we need. Just go off. I don't even care what it sounds like. Just be you. Be silly, be aggressive, be obnoxious, and so many times that becomes the magical take.
Yeah, just one more has kind of become one of my nicknames, really, with my clients. It's always that type of thing. Get the money one and then be like, all right, I think now that we have this, there's like, this can still be 10 to 15% better. But this one's from Helen. When you're learning music, how to use gear, and developing yourself as an artist, how do you know when you're ready to go to a studio and approach a producer? I'll let either of you take this one.
I think that when you feel confident, go for it, right? You might not be ready, but don't if you really feel confident that you're ready to go in, and if you've actually approached somebody and they're like, yeah, let's go into the studio, get some experience. Even if it doesn't work out the first time, you'll get the experience of doing that. So I'd say just do it when you feel like you want to try it. If you've got people that are working with you that believe in you, that's certainly a confidence booster. But when you feel like you've got material that you're proud of, go in and try and record it. It doesn't have to be, well, I think we've got a hit song here. You might not. Or you might just get great experience and you might gain a perspective on it once you've recorded it.
Cool. Let's see. What's another? This is one in a similar vein. What's the best way to meet and develop a relationship with the producer in order to have input before going to the studio?
I think just listening to that producer's body of work, I think is key. I mean, and again, because like David said, you are hiring the producer or bringing the producer into the project for not only their expertise, but also for their personal taste. And so I think by kind of going down the producer's catalog discography, you can get a vibe for sort of what general direction he may help you take your music to. In terms of the networking, I just think, in modern, in 2021, 2022, really, there's a lot of stuff, that is succeeding from the ground level of artists who may not be signed, but have built up, somewhat of a Spotify following or a YouTube presence, or really kind of, there's a lot of DIY success going on. And, I think a lot of producers are, they keep artists like that on the radar as well from the other side, So I think when you see an artist that's kind of been has the drive to be able to take themselves to the level that they are at, it's inspiring as a producer to maybe work with that person, and even because you're not starting at zero, you're not starting, so someone that can garner their own followers, even if they've been making music on their computer just to get started or whatever that is. I think just getting off the ground and having some followers and just start making the music however you can, that can draw a lot of attention if you start sort of building a presence online.
Cool. This one's from Scott. This is another pretty interesting one, and definitely has to do with kind of more of the arrangement side of things. Have you ever been in a situation where a performer or band brings a tune to the studio with a certain tempo, vibe, style, etc., and you strongly feel that it should be completely different, i.e. they bring in a hard rock song and you think it would be a hit as a ballad? What do you do at this point? And I'm going to add a tack on to this question myself, which is, would you even take on that gig if you knew there was a song that you would be completely changing it, or had discussed that already?
Well, I think that, as I said before, that you try to work out those things in pre-production before you actually get to the studio. It's a much cheaper way to do it. But I think that I've been in situations with bands where if they're a good band that play together a lot, you try it both ways. You try it as a rock song. If you're playing together as a band, you can try it as a heavy song. You can try it as a ballad song. You can try it as a reggae song. I mean, Frank Zappa used to tour. I don't know if some of these people might not remember who Frank Zappa is, but Frank Zappa was a really great musician, surrounded himself by a bunch of great musicians, and he had a whole catalog where he would tell his musicians, okay, well, if I do this, and this was live, like, we'll play this song, but in a reggae format, or we'll do this, we'll play this song, but it's a ballad, whereas the record was more of a rock song. If you try things out, you might discover things that you weren't expecting, and it might open your eyes to stuff. You might hate it, but again, just try it. Mm-hmm. Just try playing it that way, and say, you know, if you respect the people that you're working with, and you respect the musicians that you're playing with, and everybody's open to these things, then you find out that you just try these things. You try it as a different kind of thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think too that I'm a believer that a great song is a great song. So if it's a great song and it's just in its basic, you know, what the message is, what the chord structure is, then it can probably span different genres, different tempos, different feels, degree of heaviness, whether it's a rock song, whether it's a pop song. And I think that's when you can kind of when you can slice a song numerous ways, that's a good indicator that the song's very strong.
Agreed.
Cool. And I guess a question of my own here is kind of, I've sort of done both ways, just from a preference standpoint, I guess, because, you know, as an artist, and if you're working with a producer, you can kind of explicitly choose to do it both ways. Do you prefer to kind of, you know, have a project come to you sort of prepared, or do you like being in on the ground floor and just kind of really having an influence from before it really starts? So like,
I you know, because with majority of my producing, I produce with my partner Howard Benson, who's another acclaimed producer, but we sort of have our roles when it comes to that, where I'm generally really in the weeds with the song and the artist from the get-go. As soon as we start working, okay. I'm right in there on, you know, kind of making sure the best. Maybe I'm co-writing with the artist. You know, I'm an artist myself, so I think that there's an element of trust there with other artists, because I'm on the other side as well. So I'm in the weeds with basically trying to get the best material and make it the best version of itself. And then, you know, when we bring it to, you know, to Howard, he's of course along the entire way, but as a sort of we kind of bounce things off him, and okay. He is kind of, you know, has that he's another resource of quality control. So
you're doing more of the pre-production and the kind of building ahead of time, and then he's kind of coming in and doing.
Yeah, it's all, you know, we're all kind of communicating the entire time, but in terms of kind of getting in and try, like, let's rewrite this verse, or let's try to change these chords, and you know, I'm sometimes that's just I'm one-on-one with the artist doing that. Mm-hmm. You know, Howard is you know, really, and when it comes to recording the vocals, he's excellent at that. He's got an excellent ear, and so, you know, but even at the time where the vocals are being recorded, that doesn't mean the song can't change. You know, if you know, he may say this lyric could be better, let's make it better, and then we're kind of back to the drawing board on that line. So it's kind of a living and breathing organism the whole time.
Cool. David, what do you think?
I'm a bit more of a lone wolf, Neil, so I kind of do both of those things, but I too like to get in the weeds, and mm-hmm. If I'm going to be producing a band, I'll usually, unless they're something that's pretty established, that the material is pretty written by the time I get there, which also happens. But if it's really in the raw stages, I don't mind getting down and dirty with the band right away and saying, okay, I think this song needs this, I think this song needs that. You're playing too long here, you're not playing long enough here, you need to change this melody. I get right in there in the weeds and then take it all the way from that stage right to the end. So I don't mind getting things that the ideas are more fully formed. It saves me some of my energy, mm-hmm. but I do like to get in early on and really try to help the song itself, and if it's an album, the whole album and collection of songs be as good as they can. So I like to get in the weeds right away, and I'll often do that with a band where I'll say, okay, you know, we're going to start recording in 3 months or 4 months time. But let's start, send me some of the material now so I can give you some feedback right away, and then we can get into pre-production. So the feedback loop starts pretty early on in the procedure, once we've decided we're going to work together. And sometimes that decision happens when people send you music, and if I listen to it and I don't feel like I have anything to contribute, then I say, well, look, I might not be the right guy for this because I haven't got ideas. But if I've got ideas for something, then I say, okay, I've got some ideas for this. Like I know where you're doing great, and I know where it can be improved. So let's get going. They'll send me some music. I'll give them some feedback. They'll do some more demoing at home. Then we'll get into the pre-production studio or rehearsal space or however they work. Flush them out even more and more. So by the time we get to the studio, we have it 80% sort of ready to go with some time for still inspiration and creation within the studio, doing the things that studio does very well. So layering and things like that. So, I do like to get in deep in the weeds early on. So when I get material, it doesn't bother me if the ideas are not fully fleshed out yet.
Cool. Yeah, because I know on a recent project that I was working on, I think mine and the band's favorite song that ended up coming out of those sessions was the one that basically had the least kind of built up demo, where they sent me a folder full of stuff and said, pick what you like. And the one song that I liked, it was just a voice memo of acoustic guitar, drums, and some singing. But I'm like, that's the song. To your point, Neil, of like, if it's a good song, it's a good song. And then, exactly. We then basically arranged the whole thing together.
That's a great scenario when you can pick a great song from just a voice memo, because one thing that does exist, and I encounter quite often, is especially with the way digital recording is that people can make demos sound pretty great, demos, and sometimes that's not the best thing, because then demoitis can really kick in when the demo has been flushed out well, and so suddenly you're in the studio doing it for real, and then you've got this demo that sounds great, is almost sonically too good, so that it's a constant comparison, which isn't necessarily the most healthy thing in a studio environment where you're trying to make the master recording, when you're like, well, if we love the demo so much, then we should just use that. So there's a bit so when a song just comes through and someone's like, what do you think of this, and it's magical, it's such a great scenario, you just start building the castle.
But what I find too, Neil, and I don't know if you find this as well, but when I get really well produced demos, I almost worry about that, because we know what's possible in the world of digital technology now. You can time things, you can tune things, you can edit, so everything's really well produced and put together. But what does that say about the musicianship of the band? It means, for me, it makes me completely blind about the musicianship or the quality of the singing, or because you're able to tune things, because you're able to time things, you don't know how good the musicians really are until you get playing with them, and that's a dangerous thing a little bit. That's why we'll still insist in that case to go into the rehearsal space to say, how do these guys play, or how do these people play? How do they sing? How good are they actually? And how much work is it going to be to do this? Sure, you can sit forever at a computer and do that, but these people will eventually have to go out and play this live. Can they cope with that? So it's partly that getting fully flushed out demos that sound, like a record these days. It's almost, I'd almost rather get an acoustic guitar and vocal. Or one of those old, we used to get them blaster recordings stuck in the corner of the rehearsal room.
Yeah, I suppose in that case, if you're getting like a really well produced demo, it's almost like, why are you hiring me?
Yeah. It's I still do believe analog recording and actually moving physical air against a real microphone is something that it can just I still believe that it's not completely captured in the box in digital recording. Just the physical, you're when those drums are changing the molecules in the air that are affecting the microphones all around them, and that's, you're not doing that. You're making you're recreating a model of that in the computer, and I just think that there's an audible difference there. Don't you think, David?
I agree entirely, and no amount of programming and good quality samples can make up for feel and touch and dynamic that a real player has.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. This one's from Michelle. If you're an emerging artist, do producers who from well-known and commercially successful works mind if you reach out to them about working together if you love what they do? So So I guess that's mostly for guys like you, accessibility wise. Like, I'm assuming you'd encourage people to reach out to with music to potentially try work together, or how does that work?
The worst thing I hear from particularly younger artists or even smaller labels or anything like that, when they say to me, "Yeah, we were going to call you, but we thought you'd be too expensive or you wouldn't like us." It's like, well, all you can do is ask. And if I like the project, I take a view on things. And it's like, well, if I really like this artist and I believe in them, then my rate will drop, or we'll work out some other kind of thing. But, and I like to think of myself as not a monster. So if somebody asks me their opinion on their music, I'll find something in it, even if I don't think it's very good, I'll find something in it that I like and say, this is what I think you're doing well at, and this is what I think you can improve on. Mm-hmm. I think that there are some people out there that are crueler in their assessment, but I encourage young artists to reach out and say, listen to my music if you have the time, and if you consider working with me, or would you consider working with me? I'll always try to listen to things that people send me if I can. If I'm in the middle of a project, it might not be right away, but I encourage young artists particularly to reach out.
Cool. We'll do this one as kind of the last one to wrap it up. Do either of you have any suggestions for producers who are great for jazz/AC pop big band style music?
Suggestions in what way? I mean, like if in finding clients or in finding.
I think just names. Just kind of some if you know of any people in around that would be good for that to reach out.
I think talking to studio managers is always a good idea, because the studio managers, they see there's it's a revolving door, and
they see all.
Yeah, I work at a studio west of Hamilton quite often, and the studio manager there, he's also a good friend of mine. He also engineers for me on projects as well at the studio. So he's and he does a lot of the house engineering for any of the artists that come through there. And there's lots of jazz, there's lots of bluegrass and that. So I would encourage, if someone's looking for a specific niche producer, that reaching out to like a downtown Toronto studio or wherever they happen to live is a good starting point to kind of just get people that or reach out to other artists. If you love if it's a big band record that you just love, just do some homework on who's behind the production of it.
Yeah. Go to shows when you can too.
Go to shows, go to things. I mean, Jeremy Darby over at Canterbury, he does a lot of jazz and a lot of stuff over in the West End, of Hamilton on Dufferin. He'd be a great resource for that sort of thing, somebody like that. But I agree, talk to studio managers, go see gigs. See, look at projects. It really annoys me that a lot of things on Spotify these days don't actually have proper credits on them.
Oh.
I think we're trying to work that out, but trying to find. So I understand how younger artists, it's hard to find people to work with because you can't find names anymore. They're not. It's not like picking up a record and reading the liner notes like we used to do as kids. You're trying to find out who things are. But I don't think that artists would mind if you can get a hold of them or reach out to them and say, I can't find out who produced your record, but I really loved it. Can you let me know who it was so I can approach them? That sort of thing can work out.
Cool. Awesome. So I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you guys so much for your time. This was a really, really cool conversation. I think we all got a lot out of this.
Our pleasure. And thanks everyone for joining. That was incredible.
Yeah. Thanks for the great questions.
Yeah, thanks everybody for your questions and for attending again. This will be available on nwcwebinars.com within the next few days. You'll get a follow-up email with all of that information. But until the next one, thank you so much to everybody for showing up. Thanks again, Neil and David. Thanks, Mike, for the introduction. Everybody take care and enjoy your weekend.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
After tomorrow, of course.
Hey, everyone.
But all right.
Bye.
See you, everyone.
Take care.